Welcome to the Bridegroom Speaks podcast with Laura Urcolino. One of the features here at Hope's Garden is our Brides of Christ groups, which is a heart-led study into the Song of Songs to help us come to know and love Christ the Bridegroom. In our studies, we use a guidebook called the Cantata of Love, which is a verse-by-verse reading of the Song of Songs by Father Blaise Arminian and published by Ignatius Press. In today's episode, Laura talks with Deborah, a member of the Sisterhood of Mary, Mystical Rose of God, about our heart's desires. Laura begins by reading in the Song of Songs from chapter 1, verse 4. Enjoy.
Verse 1-4. The King has brought me into his rooms. In her imagination, aflame with love, the bride dreams she has already run so far with her beloved that she is already with him at the goal of her desires. Or better yet, she knows quite well that with such a bridegroom, desire and reality are quite frequently confused. This is one of my favorite quotes from St. John of the Cross. With God, one gets as much as one hopes for. The good God, as St. Therese of Lisieux comments, could not inspire desires that would be impossible to fulfill. For the wildest desires, if they are in conformity with the Spirit of God, if they are desires for his love and his service, are surely begotten in us by the only one who can ensure, of necessity, their fulfillment. He who desires God with a whole soul is certain to possess the one he loves, says St. Gregory the Great. Two things are coming to my mind right now, and I think we need to stop and talk about. The first one is St. John of the Cross. St. John of the Cross's quote, with God, one gets as much as one hopes for. We need to dare to hope for big things, for the fulfillment of our desires. And first, that means coming to know what the true desires of our hearts are. But the other thing that was coming to me this time was reading St. Therese's quote. The good God could not inspire desires that would be impossible to fulfill. And a memory is coming back really clearly to me of the first time that I read Christopher West's book, Theology of the Body for Beginners. And it was during a time of really deep suicidal depression. I just had my hysterectomy after the 9th baby was born, and I was really sick. I got really sick after that surgery and was back in the hospital, I think like 8 days after the surgery even. And I almost died from a blood complication. And I was back home, and I had an 8-month-old baby, 9 kids. And I was spending most of my time on our family room couch looking out this big picture window at the dead woods and flower beds behind me. It was January, and thinking there was just no point. I didn't know if I'd make it through the winter. I didn't know if I could keep bearing all the pain and depression. And I felt as dead as the world looked outside. And someone gave me a copy of his book, Theology of the Body for Beginners, which I think was new at the time. It was like 2006. And as soon as I started reading it, you know, like Christopher West says, something pierces your heart. It pierced my heart. And I knew, I recognized it immediately as truth, goodness, and beauty. And I knew that this is what I'd been longing for. This kind of love was what I had always dreamt of and longed for. This mutual self-giving and receiving, this tender and pure, this love. I thought I would just never know it. That for whatever reason, this is what God wanted for us, but for some reason, and in my depressed mind at that time, I thought I must have done something horribly wrong in my life, that he just didn't want it for me, and that I would never know it unless somehow I still ended up in heaven, which at the time I was convinced I wouldn't, because I was really pretty convinced I'd commit suicide and I would not end up there. And so I thought, I will never know this desire in me. I did not know that those desires are written on our hearts by him. And as St. Therese says, he will fulfill them. Like his desire is to fulfill those desires. And he doesn't withhold the fulfillment of those desires to punish us, but to call to us, to stretch us, to seek him, to fulfill them, to allow him to be the one, not the false loves, not to misdirect those desires at other humans or other relationships, but to learn that he is the one who wants and can fulfill them.
When you talk about sharing my desires with the bridegroom and his desiring me even more and wanting me to share my desires and being more specific about what they are, that's for me, because of my history in dealing with the men in my life, my desires didn't mean anything. You know, I was told, well, you don't even know what you're talking about. Well, you know, you don't need that. That's sort of negative language when I would express having a desire of some sort and being told that it wasn't, you know, I wasn't good enough to have it or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it's a little scary for me to say, okay, this is what I really desire. And can I trust that?
Right. Is it even safe to say I have a desire?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I think it's hard for a lot of women. We think of the desires of our hearts like, okay, yeah, if I have time someday, I'll sit around and think about the desires of my hearts, but I'm way too busy for that, you know. But coming to understand that it's those desires that God has written on our hearts that lead us to him. And that is the goal, right? Is to seek God and to find God because he's seeking us. And so that's what Jesus actually wants to talk to us about, is the desires of our hearts, more than our to-do list, more than the children we're worried about or our finances. He wants to speak to us about our desires. And that was hugely shocking for me. And I remember it was my first time at Christ the Bridegroom Monastery in the beginning of June of 2019. Mother Gabriella had handed me the cantata earlier, my first evening there, and I had opened it and read it for the first time. And then I went to bed. And I told her the next morning when I talked to her that I thought maybe I was going crazy, because all through the night I heard, well, I said, I think Jesus was singing to me. And I told her some of the things I'd been hearing. And she said, yeah, that's the Song of Songs. That's what he sings to us. You're not crazy. And I said, and I thought I kept waking up hearing him say, tell me the desires of your heart. And she says, yes, that's Jesus. And so the next day I spent time in the chapel and out in the grass talking to him about these desires of my heart that he wanted to hear from me, that he wanted me to speak aloud. And my first argument was, well, my desires don't matter. Whatever you want, Lord, you just tell me what you want. I'll do what you want. And he kept saying, no, we make our plans together. He wanted to hear what I desired. And then I told him, well, you already know the desires of my heart. You know my heart better than me. Why do I even have to know them? You know, I give them all to you. But he was insistent that I needed to stop and I needed to look in my own heart and see what it was I truly desired, and that I needed to speak it out loud to him. For me too, there was a lot of fear in that from my past, not feeling that it was safe to speak those desires, that it was a lot safer to say I didn't have any, that they didn't matter, than to look at them, that's a lot scarier. Because what if I do get up the courage to speak them again, only to have them ridiculed or ignored or stomped on? But that's, to me, in my life story, one of the incomprehensible things about Jesus and his love, that he doesn't ever do that. There's no falsehood in him. There's no trickery. There's no manipulation. He is love. And he truly wants us to speak the desires of our hearts to him, because he wants to fulfill them. He is the fulfillment of them. God himself is seeking us, is desiring oneness and union, desires to pour his love out upon us. And he's written those desires right into our hearts and hopes that we will seek him, because he will let himself be found. He wants to be found. And isn't that then what St. Gregory the Great said? He who desires God with a whole soul is certain to possess the one he loves. And so this is that then going with the bridegroom into our hearts and asking him to help us to discover our own heart's desires that we are so out of touch with for whatever reasons, fear, wounds from relationships where our desires were not heard or they were ridiculed, or we're afraid sometimes to even think about the desires of my heart. It's too painful to find them and then think, well, they're never going to be fulfilled. It's easier to say, I just don't have any, than to be able to say out loud, no, I do. I do desire to be loved for who I am. I do desire to be seen, to be known, to be loved. We're so afraid, just like that in that moment in 2006 for me, and then it became easier to not think about the desires of my heart. Well, that's a waste of time. Who cares about that? But that's what Jesus cares about. That's where we find him. That's where he can come and fill us. So that changes then. You can allow that to change the conversation that you have in your prayer with the bridegroom, asking him to help you to see those desires, to discover them in yourself, and to speak them aloud to him so he can fill them.
I know that, I told you the story about, I was at a retreat of some kind, and at one point, and the retreat leader was talking about, dancing, and it was exciting for me. And I was just so uplifted by it. And I kept, wondering, is he going to dance? Why won't he dance? And then we had a question and answer period. And so I stood up and I said, well, are you going to dance? And, when are you going to dance? And he just sat back and he said, well, I'm always dancing in my heart. And it took me by surprise. And I thought, oh, you could do that. You could dance always within your heart. No one can take that away from you. That beautiful. Yeah, I might physically be elated and want to dance, but there are people in wheelchairs who can't do that, but yet no one can take that dance from within them away.
That was a real struggle for me in getting sick. For so long I had been in so much pain with the chronic pelvic floor dysfunction pain that I could not, when my kids would dance or we'd have dance parties with the grandkids, and I couldn't take part in that. And then after he healed me in 2019, one of the greatest joys was being able to dance, especially being able to dance holding my grandbabies. I'm not a real dancer, but I love dancing with a baby or a little one in my arms, and I love dancing with Jesus. And then since I've gotten sick again this year, I don't have the breath to dance, and anymore even singing I can't do. And I realized that I had stopped even playing like my bridegroom playlist because I wanted to sing, and then I would just cry when I would try to sing and I'd run out of breath and start coughing. And so I stopped playing it. And a few weeks ago, I realized I was really, really missing my music. But I told Jesus that it made me sad now to listen to it because I couldn't sing and dance for him. And that's what he said to me, that in our hearts, we're always singing and dancing together. And to just listen to the music and imagine, just picture us dancing together, that I didn't have to be able to dance physically or even sing, that he knew my heart was singing to him.
For more resources and our consecration to Christ the Bridegroom, visit hopesgarden.com, the sanctuary where the spousal love of Christ the Bridegroom heals hearts, marriages, and families.